We are doing Jewish mysticism lessons in Tanya, and this is the last of our first 8-week series, which was titled The Basics. And this week's lesson, chapter 8, is titled Negative Energy, part 2. We are on page 104 in the Tanya, and in handout number 8 for chapter 8 in the handouts. So in last week's lesson, we began a little bit talking about negative energy, for lack of a better word. I mean, they titled the chapter very well. But the Kelipot, right? In Hebrew, we call them Kelipah, which means shell, which means the other side, etc. We spoke all about this. And we explained that Kelipah is divided into 2 sections. There is the one Kelipah which is more neutral, Kelipas Noga, called the bright Kelipah. Why? Because it's powerful. It can be converted for good, it can be converted for bad. Example of something which finds its energy or finds its source in Kelipas Noga is something like taking a swig of water, right? Or in the words of Tanya, eating meat and drinking wine, or telling a joke, right? These things are very neutral activities and can be used for the good, can be used for the bad. We've all seen comedians that we enjoy. Why do we enjoy them? Because we enjoy watching them. They manage to do stand-up, and they don't have to pick on anybody, right? So you have someone who the only way they can make a joke is at the expense of another, right? They have to do a prank. They have to be embarrassing one person in order to, right? And that's one way to use a joke for not such great purposes, right? So in that instance, what did we explain? Kelipas Noga becomes incarcerated or chained down to the Shalosh Kelipas Atmeos, right? So Kelipas Noga is sort of this flexible medium, and either it gets pulled to the left, to the negative energy, right? To the Shalosh Kelipas Atmeos, to the 3 impure Kelipas, or you can take that same energy that there is in a joke, right? Because the origin is neither holy nor unholy, right? You can take that same that same joke, and use it for the good, right? And we brought down the example of Rabbah in the Talmud, who used to say a joke at the beginning of class in order to put his students at ease. The great rabbis at ease, like that, they should be able to study Torah. Similarly, with eating meat and drinking wine, it can either be done just to fatten oneself and eating just for the sake of eating, for the sake of one's pleasure, or it can be done to honor the Shabbos, or to use that energy to serve God, or whatever particular good act or holy act the Jew chooses to do with it. Okay, and that, in a nutshell, is a summary of chapter 7. Of course, you were all here, so you know all the ins and outs and the nitty-gritty that we got into. And in this week's lesson, we are going to talk. So this week's lesson is split up into 3 parts, as it usually is, by Rabbi Chaim Miller. The first section is the limits of good intention, and here we're going to talk about how powerful our intention is. Right. So when we do something and we choose to do it either for a good reason or not such a great reason, right? So as you can imagine, that can affect very much the outcome of our actions, but it's also limited to a certain degree, meaning your intentions only go so far, right? We all know that sometimes people have great intentions, and yet it's a negative act coming out. So not just because your intentions are good is the act that comes out of it a good act. Everybody on the same page as me? Okay, that's going to be part 1. In part 2, which he titles Kelipah detoxification, we are going to get very, very heavy. My job as the instructor is going to be to lighten things up, okay? Because we're going to talk about some things that you've heard of before, may have been mystified to you a little bit. We are going to explain them on a very practical level what happens, but I am going to attempt to the best of my abilities not to freak you out, not to frighten you, and not to make the rest of your lives that you should be obsessed with going to hell, or some sort of cleansing that's going to have to happen to your soul, or anything negative that's going to happen to you as a result of actions that you do here in this world, right? Because that's very important. It's important to understand there are consequences to our actions. We are told about them in the Torah. The Alter Rebbe is going to talk to us about them, teach us about them. The Alter Rebbe chooses, for the most part, in Tanya, not to talk about them. But in the context of negative energy, when someone actually does something which is forbidden by the Torah, right, there is a consequence. Judaism does believe in hell, quote unquote, right? I mean, we're not going to use the word hell because we'll try to actually stick to Torah sources, right? And we'll use the words that the Torah uses, but we will talk about them. I'll try to lighten it up and not to get too negative, okay? Not to get too dark. And then at the end, we're going to talk about this is the title, this is the class Negative Energy. I know we talk about some really dark stuff here, but I think it's important. Look, we spent 5 chapters talking about the light side, right? Talking about the side of the lights, talking about the Nefesh Elokis, the godly soul. We have to talk about, right? What do they say? Know your enemy, right? So it's important to know that we're made up of two sides, and this potential to do everything that we spoke about in the last chapter and in this chapter exists within us. So in the last chapter, we're going to talk about the flip side, right? If you remember, when we were talking about the godly soul, the Alter Rebbe dwelt for a full chapter on the highest level of godly unification, which was what? Anybody remember? Studying Torah, right? Where when we study Torah, the godly intellect becomes a part of our brains, etc. Right? We got it that in depth. So in this week's lesson, the Alter Rebbe, this week's chapter, the Alter Rebbe is going to talk about secular wisdom and the damage that might do to the brain, and we'll talk about when that applies and when that doesn't apply. Okay? Mm-hmm. So that's the goals for today's lesson. Okay. So let's dive right into it. So last week we left off with describing the terminology asur, right? Irit helped us out with a little bit of Hebrew. Asur can also be used for someone who is incarcerated, someone who is. We spoke about the blessing that we make every morning, matir asurim, which means he who unties those that are bonded, right?
Prisoner.
Right, exactly. Redeems those that are in prison. What?
Yeah.
What was the other word?
Inmate. Inmate,
right, exactly. Asur is the word they use for inmates.
Asir.
Asir. Even in modern Hebrew.
The asir is asur.
Right, there we go. Okay. So you're even getting a little bit of Hebrew grammar. And so we spoke about how anytime we do something prohibited according to Torah, the word we use for it is incarcerated. We are doing something, not we, but the person who is doing something prohibited, for instance, someone who eats pig, is doing something incarcerated. Why the term incarcerated? So we spoke about because Kelipah, right, gets its energy from holiness. And we, as Jews, are a great source, right, with an neshama inside of us, with a piece of God himself inside of us, right, are a great source of holiness. So if Kelipah wants to survive and it needs to get its energy from holiness, it's going to try to trap the Jew, or at least suck a little bit on the Jew's soul, a little bit to get some godly energy, like that it can survive. Right? Mm-hmm. Sounds very, I don't know, like a horror movie or something, right? Like a suck you from the soul and whatever. All right. All this goes on without us even being aware of it. And so, as a result, there are certain things that Jews are forbidden from doing. Why? Because there's negative. They find their source in negative energy, right? They get their energy from negativity, from shalosh klipas atmeos, the three unholy or impure klipas, right? And when a Jew involves himself, heaven forfend, with such an act, then he feeds the klipa, right? Now, when klipas noga is involved, right? So this neutral one. So then if a Jew chooses to do a negative activity with this klipas noga, then he's trapping klipas noga, also asur, also incarcerated within the shalosh klipas atmeos. All right? Okay. So now the question is, what is the source? We spoke about this already last week or 2 weeks ago. What is the source or the origin of the Yetzer Hara? The evil inclination, right? Not our nefesh ba'amit, or even the nefesh ba'amit, even the soul, the animalistic soul. We said the source of the animalistic soul is not in the three impure klipas. Where is it?
Hashem.
No, that's our neshama. That's our godly soul. What's about the animalistic soul? Of course, everything finds its source in Hashem originally, like we spoke about. Right? But the animalistic soul, we said, is also the source of our life. So it's not a bad thing necessarily. It comes from klipas noga, right? This neutral state. Now the question is, why would anything, right? Think about it. Anything was created by, or finds its energy, finds its source, its origin in klipas noga, which is this neutral state. Why would it ever want to sink to such a low? Right? Why would the Yetzer Hara? What is this concept of a Yetzer Hara, an evil inclination, a desire to do something not good? Right? We all struggle with this. We all own one, right? A Yetzer Hara, an evil inclination, the desire to do not good. We spoke at length how that actually gives us freedom of choice. That when we do good, it gives value to our choice, right? But where does that even come from? How does that make sense? If its origin is only from so low, okay, it's not holy, but it's not from pure evil. It doesn't come from the shalosh. Why would it ever want to associate with that? Where does the desire arise in a Jew? If a Jew has everything that inspires a Jew, comes either from the nefesh ha'elokit, the godly soul, or from nefesh ha'bahamit, from the animalistic soul. But none of them find their source in the shalosh klipas atmeos, in the three impure klipas. So why would they ever be drawn to that? In other words, why would a Jew ever have a desire to eat something not kosher?
Because he's been suggested by Satan.
Very good. And this is where we get to the demons outside us, right? So whereas many other religions will teach about the demons inside us, it's the reason I brought up this question, and to make it very logical question, is to prove the point, and this is what the Alter Rebbe is getting to, that demons do not exist within us. There is no such thing as something evil that exists within the Jew. That doesn't exist. We might have a desire to do something bad, but that always comes from something outside of us. And again, here it's going to be the difference will be it'll be split into whether it's neutral or whether it's something actually that is evil or comes from Shalosh Klippos Atmeos, right? And this is where the Alter Rebbe quotes the Zohar. I believe it's the Zohar. Again, on page 105, towards the bottom of the page. Therefore, you know what? Let's start from the introduction. We'll read it inside. It'll give us that clarity. Now we have established that both biblical and rabbinical forbidden activities are powered by the three impure klippas. We need to explain why an animal soul from klippas noga is drawn to these impure klippa activities, which are more corrupt than its own energy, right? So it's drawn to something that's even more connected with evil than it itself is, right? Why would that be? So the Alter Rebbe begins. Therefore, the Yetzer Hara, which is what we call our evil inclination or our impulse to evil, and desire for forbidden things, does not originate from the animal soul of Klippas Noga, but from an external influence. In other words, it has to be coming from outside the Jew.
What part of page 105 are you at reading?
105, towards the bottom. The beginning of the line is namely.
Oh, okay. Got it.
Thank you. Namely, and here he quotes the Zohar, Hushed Mishedin Nuchrayin, right? One of the foreign demons, which has the energy of the Yetzer Hara of wicked nations of the world, whose souls are from the three impure klippas. And then he continues, and on the other hand, the Yetzer Hara, desire to satisfy yourself, I'm at the bottom of the page, and now we're on page 106, with kosher pleasures, comes from what the Zohar calls one of the Jewish demons. In other words, or Shed Mishedin Yehudayin. Okay? So you may have heard the Hebrew term shade or shed, right, which means a demon, literally. The concept exists. According to Jewish tradition, all demons have been eradicated from the world, at least physical manifestations of demons, as of the times of the Baal Shem Tov, which is about 250 years ago. At least on a more practical level, in terms of bumping into a demon. There are lots of things that Jews do. You may have heard of them before. Not sitting between, that a woman should not sit between two men or a man between two women, or crossing over a snake, I think, on the path. Lots of different, a lot of them to do with palm trees. They're brought down in the Talmud all the time. And this is because shedding or demons actually existed on a physical level back in the day, and they had to have all sorts of things to avoid them. But in today's day and age, when they for the most part stick around in their world, right? The time that they, and I don't know if this is the same use of the word shade, but this concept of a demon exists in the impure klippas, right? And that demon obviously is attempting to get as close as it could to a Jew's soul. And our job as a Jew is to avoid the desire, the inclination, right? That's why we use that word, to do something associated with that side. Right? And that's why we have that desire within us. Why? Not because the power is inside of us, but because the power is outside of us. And those powers outside of us are split into two: the Jewish demons and the foreign demons. The foreign demons are what inspire us or invoke within us a desire to do something that's associated with the three klippos hatmeos, right? The three impure klippas, in other words, ultimate evil, and something a kosher pleasure, such as just what does the Alter Rebbe uses as an example here? He just says, desires that are kosher. So, a person likes a good piece of music, right? Why do we have that inspiration within us? Why do we like music, right? I mean, of course, we could touch upon that from a different angle. That, music is the pen of the soul, etc., and the effect that music has on us. But the desire to listen to music, right? Okay, let's not take music. It's a little bit more spiritual. The desire to eat something, right? Why do I like to eat these cookies? Where does that desire come from? That does come from the demons, but it comes from Jewish demons. In other words, right? What we call Jewish demons, because, like we said, that act is unholy until proven holy, right? That act of eating the cookie can end up being negative unless we channel that energy and we use it for good. Okay, but that doesn't come from Shedin Nuchrain, it doesn't come from the foreign demons, but rather from a more neutral source. Okay. All right. Section 2. Page 106. Kelipah detoxification. Okay. So, the question is like this. Let's say a Jew, right? Nobody in this room, heaven forbid, it shouldn't happen to any one of us, but a Jew goes and does something completely against God's will, right? He eats something not kosher. We'll use that example because it's a good example. Okay, so we all know what's the way out of that. What's the detoxification process? Step number 1 is what? Always Teshuvah. Always. Teshuvah means returning to God, repenting, right? And that's the Jewish way of things. There are all sorts of midrashim and verses in the Torah itself that tell us that the doors to Teshuvah, Daltei Teshuvah, are never closed. Right? The doors of Teshuvah, no matter how much a person associates himself with the wrong side, he can always do Teshuvah, he can always return to God. How? What's the recipe? Very simple. Maimonides, right, no one less than the Rambam himself, explains the path to Teshuvah is very simple. Regret for the past, resolve for the future. Right? So step 1 is regret for the past. We want to regret any negative actions we've done in the past in our lives completely. The Rambam elaborates on this. We'll open a parenthesis to talk about it a little bit. The Rambam talks about how if there's a particular thing that a person knows that he does, that he did, then the ultimate regret is when he finds himself in exactly the same situation again. Right? Let's say it was something to do with eating non-kosher. Again, we'll just use that example, right? So if a person ate non-kosher, and then he decides, I'm going kosher. From now on, I'm only going to eat kosher. And then he goes and he passes by the same restaurant that he always used to eat in, and it's aroused within him a real desire to eat non-kosher. And then he overcomes that desire and he says, no, but I'm going to go and eat kosher. And he goes and eats kosher. That is the ultimate level of regret. Why? Because then you actually realize you've eradicated that desire or that ability or that inclination from within you. And we'll talk much more about this over the course of the rest of Tanya, right? And obviously I'm using a very, I just like to give these disclaimers when we give classes that we talk about these things. We talk about, let's say, eating non-kosher and a very simple thing, whatever, right? I mean, not to downplay eating non-kosher, right? But everybody can translate it into their own lives, into whatever it is that they may have done that they don't think is exactly according to the way that Hashem or God would have wanted, right? That's pretty straightforward. Okay, so first thing is Teshuvah, right? So end parentheses. The first thing is Teshuvah, regret for the past, resolve for the future not to do it anymore. But Teshuvah doesn't always help with everything. Okay? Why is that? That's because of something that the Alter Rebbe calls a reshimu. Okay? There's a particular residue, a little, left over, that there's nothing to do about. On a practical level, let's think about the eating non-kosher, right? So a person could regret it with all his heart and soul. A person could resolve for the future that he's going to do as best as he can. The fact of the matter is going to remain that he ate non-kosher. On a physical level, he ingested non-kosher food, and that non-kosher food became part of his flesh and blood. And that, right now, obviously he regrets it completely, which does uplift it, which does eradicate the sin or whatever the negative action of what he did. But there's always going to remain a little residue. And that little residue, there's the standard way to get rid of it, and then there's like special people who can get rid of it in their own way. Okay, we'll talk about that a little later. The standard way to get rid of it, so that we'll talk about 3 different detoxifications, or 3/4 detoxifications that the neshama goes through. Okay, all these things happen after a person passes away. Number 1, chibut hakever. Chibut hakever means after death. What were the words? After death cleansing. Okay, hakever means the grave. Chibut means what? To hit, I think, right? According to Jewish tradition, the way it works is that after a person, I just know that everybody's curious about these types of things, so we'll demystify it a little bit, but let's keep away from being freaked out by these things. We focus, right? Anan pala di imam anan. We are soldiers of light. We try to focus on the light side always, right? But we have to talk about the dark side like that we're aware of it. According to Jewish tradition, after a person passes away, there is something called chibut hakever, which means that if a person needs it, right, for doing certain averot, certain wrongdoings, so then there's something called chibut hakever, which means the way it's explained is that the person's soul, even though it's left the body, is forced back into the body for a brief period, while angels come down and they beat within the grave, and it's described at length in a book called Yalkut HaRo'im. Okay, so that corrects this. What about empty speech, right? So worthless discussion, right? Even though it's so that's also that. So that's basically an example of something that would be allowed. You're completely allowed to, right? There's no prohibition in the Torah against sitting around and just talking about nothing at all, right? But it is damaging for the person, right? Why? Because they're wasting away their life, right? So for something like that, there's something called kaf hakela. Kaf hakela means it literally means kaf means like the hollow, like the cup. Hakela, is this in modern Hebrew as well? A sling?
Yeah.
Is that what it is in modern Hebrew as well?
Kela?
I don't know.
Maybe.
Now, why is it called kaf hakela? Because what happens to the soul is that the soul, now that it's passed on from this world, all it wants is holy desires, right? So it's in the holiest of worlds, right? And then the malachim, these angels, take the neshama and they swing it all the way to the other side. They force it to have these desires to do the most lustful or physical desire that a human being ever had. And for the soul, that is tremendous pain. To go back and forth between these, even worse than having a desire which is lustful, is first having a desire which is very physical, and then swinging to having a desire to being in the most holy place possible, and then swinging to be in the most physical place possible, and swinging back. That's why it's called like a sling that goes from side to side. So that's the other one. What about negative speech? Right. So that was just empty speech. What about negative speech? When a person speaks lashon hara or speaks negatively about other people, right? So for that, there's something called Gehenom, right? Gehenom means purgatory. And there's a difference. This is why I said 3/4, because purgatory is split into two. There's something called Gehenom Shel Esh and Gehenom Shel Sheleg, which means purgatory of fire and purgatory of snow. And the difference is, okay, we'll get into it just briefly. Again, I don't want to dwell on these things too much. The difference is whether the sin committed was positive or negative, right? In order not to do a positive commandment, right? So God tells us to put on tefillin every day. In order not to put on tefillin, you don't need to have fire, right? You don't need to have passion. You need to have a cold indifference. I don't care about tefillin. So because that transgression comes from coldness, right, or apathy, therefore the punishment or let's call it the consequence, the fixing of that, right? Remember, all these things are not punishments. They're cleansing of the soul. They're just fixing the soul before it can continue on to where it needs to continue on. The fixing is to go into Gehenom Shel Esh. It needs a little more fire, right? And the opposite, right? Doing a negative commandment, right? When someone chooses to sleep with someone that they're not allowed to, that comes from a fire within them, right? That comes from a warm part of them. They've it's passion. And therefore, what they need is a little bit of cooling down, and that's where Gehenom Shel Sheleg comes in. All right? Everybody take a deep breath. It's going to be all right.
Well, the whole purpose or the whole process is so that the soul can stand before Hashem, right?
The purpose of this process is that the soul can once again connect completely with Hashem.
Right.
Also, very important thing to remember. No matter what a Jew does, he cannot take away a mitzvah that he's done. Okay?
That's good news.
So a mitzvah that we do, it's not like, when you do something, when you do a transgression or something, so then, it might wipe away all the times that you lit Shabbos candles or put on tefillin or whatever it is, right? No. A mitzvah, like we spoke about at length, and I want to remind everybody about this, even though this is the section where we're talking about negative energy, I'll throw in a little bit of positive energy just to lighten things up. We spoke about at length the deep connection that a Jewish soul can have with God when it does a mitzvah, right? And when it learns Torah, when it does something positive, right? So even if sometimes we slip up, this is why we say we're introducing this because it's important to know that it exists. To focus on it is definitely not a good idea ever. Your inspiration to do something good should not be, I'm afraid of kaf hakela or chibut hakever or Gehenom Shel Esh or whatever it is. Your inspiration to do a mitzvah should be because a mitzvah connects us with the most unlimited thing in the world, with God.
Dveikut.
Right? Dveikut, exactly. We spoke about it, becoming one with godliness. That's our inspiration to do a mitzvah.
So who keeps the score?
So he keeps the score. Well, God keeps the score. Right? We're told in Pirkei Avot, what's the lashon? You should know three things.
From who you will stand.
No, from where you come. You jump to the third one. From whence you come, where you will go to. Right? Miza. Right? You should know before whom you're going to stand and give a calculation. Who is that? God himself. And he knows, right? Ayin ro'eh, ozen shamat, right? We're told that Hashem is the eye that sees and the ear that hears and the one who knows. And what's the end of that phrase? V'chol ma'asecha b'sefer nichtavim. That all of your actions are written down in a book.
It's a lot of bookkeeping.
Yeah, it's a lot of bookkeeping. Yeah. God is the ultimate bookkeeper.
What about if you regret doing a mitzvah? Sometimes people...
Regret doing a mitzvah?
Yeah.
Too bad.
Too bad?
Yep.
Okay.
You can't take away a mitzvah. It doesn't work that way. There's an unlimited power to it that cannot be taken away. And God designed the world this way in His ultimate kindness, that when we do something good, there's nothing we can do to take it away from this world. When we do something bad, there is that ability. And that's precisely where the source is for all these phrases that you hear. Oh, the doors of Teshuvah are never closed. No matter how far you have fallen, you can always come back. All these phrases. Why? Because it's true. Right? Because the power of light, what do we say? The power of light is so much more powerful than the power of darkness. Right? And one sort of good line. Darkness is a coward.
Good question.
1 second. And one sort of good line. Darkness is a coward. Shine a light and it runs away. Right? Is that true?
Yeah. All
Okay.
you need is one candle and the dark is gone.
Exactly. I'm sorry I forgot to put on napkins, but please do me a personal favor. If I come home with all these cookies, Gitti's going to say it's because you didn't pause and give a moment to everybody. So please have a cookie, enjoy. Yes,
say bracha.
Yes, say bracha, which is mezonot, and bring some positive energy into the world.
I have a question.
Yes.
Are there degrees of wrongdoing? For example, if I eat pig, or if I'm someplace that there is no kosher food and I'll eat bread, but it's not as hersher.
Okay, so you're really asking two completely separate questions. You don't realize it, but you're asking two completely separate questions. Are there degrees in wrongdoing? There are. However, that's not really your question here. Mm-hmm. Your question is, at what point is it a wrongdoing? Because in the Torah, there's halacha, and then there's sort of extra levels of halacha. Okay? So for instance, to eat actual non-kosher is probably quite hard. I know that keeping kosher in today's day and age is associated with eating something that has a kosher symbol on it, and that's because you know 100% that it's kosher then. Right? But there's a good chance if you, first of all, more things than you think have kosher symbols on it. Even if you're not attempting to keep kosher, more things than you think have a kosher symbol on it. Not just that, if it doesn't have a kosher symbol on it, first of all, the reason might be just because they never approached a koshering agency, or the koshering agency never approached them, so it could be it's completely kosher. Number one. Number two, there could be other reasons why it's not ideal to eat it, but once you ate it, it's not a full transgression. Okay, so without getting into all the details, this is not a kosher lesson, not a lesson on kosher and all the details that go into it, but there are many different, Pam, I think we had this conversation a little bit, right? On one level. When we were talking about koshering her kitchen, that there are nuances, there are stringencies.
A blessing over food that isn't kosher, is that a double? That's just
silly.
It's ridiculous.
There's an interesting story. I forgot it. I forgot the details of the story, but the gist of it, it's not a story. It's brought down in a book. There's a book that's called, right. So there's a genre in Jewish law called Sha'alot or Teshuvot. In English, we call it responsa. I don't think it's an English word. I think it was made up just to be the translation of Sha'alot or Teshuvot. What it means is questions and answers. In other words, throughout history, Jews have been asking questions of rabbis, right? And it would be the equivalent in today's day and age of a blog, right? Like a rabbi's blog. People ask questions and he responds. Right? But back in the day, it all happened on pen and paper. So people would send him questions, and then he would answer, and he would spend a lot of time researching and bringing down all the sources for his answer, and he would send up an answer. And then maybe halfway through his life, he would say, a lot of these questions are common questions that I can then put in a book and bring down all of the sources as to why I paskined, or I ruled in this instance that this is kosher or not kosher, or that this is allowed or not allowed, or whatever it is, right? So this is a genre in Jewish law. Lots of the books in this room are of that genre. For people of the age of the people in this room, one of the most famous ones you'll be familiar with is Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, right? Rabbi Moses Feinstein passed away within a couple of decades. It's not he lived very recently, within our lifetimes, and he dealt with a lot of the modern issues in today's day and age, right? Technology and Shabbos, stuff like that. Now, in that genre, there's a book, a sefer. I forgot what it's called. It's not Shalot Utshuvot Min Hashamayim. It's Shalot Utshuvot. It's whatever. The gist of it is that it was responsa that took place in the concentration camps in Germany, in Poland or Germany, or only one of them, I guess. But it's one particular rabbi, and he happened to survive the Holocaust, and not happened. He was ordained to survive the Holocaust, and he wrote down all of the questions that people used to ask him behind bars in the concentration camps. And first of all, it's equal parts very immensely sad, because the questions that come up in such circumstances are not questions that anybody has anywhere else. Am I allowed to? My son is not feeling well and he needs extra sustenance. He needs more soup. Can I give him my soup, knowing that I'm endangering my own life, but I'm giving him life? Things like this. Understand? Very heavy material. But I say it's equal parts sad and equal parts inspiring, because it's also a window into that a Jew, no matter where he is connected to the Torah. And no matter what the extraneous circumstances may be, Jews were doing the same thing they did no matter where they did them in the world, which is come to a rabbi and ask him a question: what does the Torah tell me to do? And they were willing to do either way. They always came with questions, because I'm willing to, whether it's give up my life or devote. But they were willing to. Why? Because a Jew is connected to Torah like a fish is connected to water. Okay, so that was sort of an introduction, but the idea, the question was, everybody smile.
We're eating cookies, don't worry.
Where is she?
Alex, not in it.
Alex, get involved. There we go.
You want to come over here?
Okay, let's not make too big a deal out of it. Yosfilan, sit down, you'll be in the picture. Thank you.
Thank you.
Stay here, Alex. You can stay here. So in this book called Shalot Utshuvot, I forgot what it's called, the responsa that's from behind the barbed wire of the concentration camp. One of the questions was, at least remember you were the one who inspired this whole tangent here. I feel free to go on a tangent, because we don't have that much of the lesson left, and it's a shorter lesson today, so we'll take some time off here a little bit. But one of the questions is, so it's a series of questions. Question number one is, are we allowed to eat the non-kosher food that we're served? And the answer is yes.
Is that in the concentration?
Yes,
Oh, yeah.
because they didn't have anything else, and kosher is not one of the mitzvot that we are commanded, not one of the commandments that we are commanded to give up our lives for. There are only three things that the Torah tells us to do that we are commanded to give up our lives for. Anybody? Yes, Ashley?
Bowing down.
Ashley, go ahead. What?
Yeah.
Bowing down?
To
Idol worship, right? Very good, exactly. Anybody else?
adultery.
Adultery, very good. And number three is murder. Murder, adultery, and idolatry. Right? And those are the only three things that somebody puts a gun to your head and says, do this, otherwise you'll die, that we're commanded, even so, to give up our lives. Everything else, non-kosher included, is transgressible for if you're in a life and death situation. Okay, so that was question one. Question number two, Elise, was, do you make a bracha on the food? If we're allowed to eat the food, do we make a blessing on the food? And this is why I said I don't remember the story, because I do not remember what the answer was.
Oh, you don't?
No, but I will be happy to look it up. Okay?
I would say yes. Bracha is bracha.
But if you're making a bracha on something that's not
Well,
kosher,
It's
maybe
maintaining your life.
unless it was extremely non-kosher, like it was actually
no, let's say it was actually pork.
pig.
Let's say it was actually pig.
It is pig, then no. If it's bread,
I would say like you read. I would say you probably do make a blessing. Why? Because no, not because you're sustaining your life. Because what is the blessing? What is the blessing?
Well, you're being provided.
So by the way, one second. So really, this is to answer your question. More details are coming back to me. The reason they had the question is because there is a law that one does not make a blessing on non-kosher food in regular circumstances. Why is that? That's because of a verse that says it's in Tehillim chapter 10. I forgot the exact words. But basically, do not disgust your God. Right? Don't come and tell God, thank you so much for creating pig so that I can eat it, when God doesn't want you to eat pig. Right? That's the idea. But it might be 9. Don't quote me on that. He's writing down here, Tehillim chapter 10. I have to be very careful, and I'm recorded also. I don't remember exactly which chapter of Tehillim it is. But it says, do not disgust your God. So their question was, I think his answer was, either that or I'm mixing it a little bit with my own reasoning like Irit is doing. The idea was that when is it disgusting to God that we're eating non-kosher? When God wants us to eat when God doesn't want us to eat non-kosher. But in this instance, the Torah itself rules that we're allowed to eat non-kosher. Not only we're allowed to, we must eat non-kosher. Right? Because the moment that the prohibition of eating non-kosher falls off because we have to survive, right? Which obligation comes on? The obligation to survive. Right? Judaism has, for those of you that are here in the daily minyan, this was in the halacha of the day, in the morning, right? There's a Jewish obligation to do exercise, to go see a doctor, to go have a physical once a year. It's that all the different things that keep yourself healthy. There's an obligation in Judaism called V'nishmartem me'od al nafshotechem.
To go to a doctor once?
No, the obligation is not to go to the doctor. The obligation is to follow current practices. Oh, I'm talking to an acupuncturist. I have to be careful. Right, exactly. No, the obligation is to do whatever you feel is best in your life to make yourself healthy, or whatever current practice is to make yourself healthy. By the way, everybody is familiar with the famous Facebook debates or the famous social media debates about vaccinate or don't vaccinate, right? There's those people that say, you must vaccinate. Some people say, no, don't vaccinate, even if there's a gun to your head, right? In the Jewish circles, when they argue about these things, they always back it up with a Jewish source. They say, you're not allowed to vaccinate because the Torah says you have to guard your soul, and therefore you're not allowed to vaccinate because you're putting yourself in danger, right? This is the people that are of the school. And the other people say, no, you must vaccinate because there's an obligation according to the Torah to keep yourself healthy. So you must vaccinate, understand? So there is an obligation to keep yourself healthy. So back to our question, right? I know we got very off, and I apologize to the people that are on camera that might not be so interested in this, but everybody in the room is. So back to our question. In this instance, not only are you not prohibited from eating non-kosher, right? But you're commanded to eat non-kosher, right? Why? That's what comes out, because you need to survive, and you're allowed to eat non-kosher in order to survive. So therefore, you must eat non-kosher in this. In other words, the Jews in the concentration camps were not exempt; they were obligated to eat non-kosher because they had this obligation to sustain themselves, to keep themselves healthy.
This makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Makes a lot of sense, right? Now. So if so, back to our question, so does it disgust God if we make a blessing on this food? No, the opposite. Right? Why? Because we're celebrating the fact, meaning we're thanking God for giving us sustenance, which He did. In this instance, it happens to be sustenance that God would not want us to eat if we weren't in the concentration camp. Right? Can we still stay on a tangent a little bit, or should we get back to the lesson? I have one more thing I want to say on this.
Yeah.
Do it. Okay. There is a famous story of two Hasidim brothers. One of them was Rabbi Zusha of Anipali, and one of them was Rabbi Elimelech of Lizensk. In other words, they came from two different cities, but they were brothers, and they were incarcerated for whatever reason it was. This is back in Russia, back in 150 years ago, and it was probably Soviet Russia, right? Not communist Russia, maybe even before that, Tsarist Russia, whatever it was. And they were incarcerated, and they had their talis and tefillin with them, so they were able to pray. However, in the corner of the room, there was a little bucket, and that was, you've heard this story before? And that was their only means of using the restroom. So anytime they had a bowel movement, they went in that bucket. After a brief period of time, the stench in the room reached a stage, right? The guards didn't care about this, the government didn't care about this, but the stench in the room reached a stage that according to Jewish law, you're prohibited from putting on tefillin. And you're prohibited from reciting the Shema. Because you're not allowed to do that in a room together with feces, and where it stinks so much that makes you uncomfortable. And the brothers had opposite reactions. Rabbi Elimelech sat down and was crying in the corner. He was sobbing. Why? Because he was a real Torah true Jew, and he really wanted to do the mitzvah of whatever it was, putting up tefillin or reciting Shema. I don't remember the details of the story. And here he was being forced not to be in a situation where he wasn't allowed to do it. But Rabbi Zusha looked at his brother and he said, "What are you thinking? What, are you denying that God runs the world? God put us in this situation. And God put us in a situation where Torah tells us in every situation what we're supposed to do. So the fact that in most situations we're supposed to put on tefillin or recite Shema or whatever it is, and in this situation we're not supposed to, makes it any different or any less the will of God? As long as we're following what the Torah tells us to do, we're following what the Torah tells us to do." When Rabbi Elimelech heard this, he stopped crying and he got up and they started to dance together. And then the guards came into the room. He says, "No, the story's not over." And then the guards came into the room. Right? So before they had walked by and they saw him crying. This is great. Prisoners are supposed to cry. Now they walk in and here's these two crazy rabbis and they're dancing. Right? And they walk in and they're dancing such, they're sweating such and dance. They're so excited they can't even talk. So they ask them, "What are you dancing? What are you so excited about?" And like they're so excited. They say, "What are you so excited?" So they point to the corner, to the bucket. So the guard said, "That's what's making you excited? I'm taking it out of the room." And they took it out of the room and they put out the tefillin and they were able to say the Shema. All right, so this is a little bit of perspective as to what do we know about what God wants from us, right? We follow the Torah, whatever the Torah tells us to do in different scenarios. The fact that in one scenario it might be one thing, or in most scenarios, every single day of our lives, we might be commanded to put on tefillin, and in one instance, the right thing to do is not to put on tefillin for whatever reason.
Make us flexible.
A little bit. All right, section 3. This is the end of the tangent. So section 3. In our Tanya, we are on page 109, and in our handout, we are in section 3, secular wisdom. Right? The Alter Rebbe is now going to talk about when one is confronted with an opportunity to study, right? So now he can choose to study Torah or to study something secular, right? And he chooses to study secular wisdom, philosophy, some other philosophy, not Torah philosophy, obviously, right? Instead of Torah. Right? So this is a little bit of a deeper level of wasting our lives than worthless discussion. Right? When somebody is just speaking empty words and they sit and they waste their time, right? Then it's really just an emotional contamination or an emotional wastefulness, right? You're not using your brain. You're just talking gossip or whatever it is. Just nothing.
Waste of time.
Waste of time. But so you're not harming your intellectual capabilities. But when someone studies philosophy, and that philosophy is not Torah, and sometimes it's even the opposite of Torah, right? So now not only is he using his emotional capabilities, contaminating his emotions, but he's also contaminating his intellectual property, right? His intellectual faculties. And this is where the Alter Rebbe begins to discuss the contrast between what we spoke about as the ultimate unity with God, right? Remember we spoke about Torah learning? That when a Jew studies Torah, he's using his brain and his logic to do what? To wrap your brain around, right? We spoke about that euphemism. To wrap his brain around godly thought. Because God and his thought are really one. It's all the same thing. So therefore, godly thought is really godliness. So in other words, it's the ultimate unity that there can be with God. The best example we gave of this is when somebody ingests food, right? And then he digests the food, what happens? The food becomes part of his flesh and blood, not the waste, right? The part that he actually ingests. So when somebody does the same thing with secular wisdom, philosophy or something like that, right? Secular philosophy. So essentially he's doing the same thing, right? He's connecting with whatever body of work this is that opposes Torah. So in this way, he's contaminating his mind. Now there is an exception to this, right? We are famous rabbis, and everybody would number one say the Rambam, Maimonides, right? Who did study secular wisdom. The Rambam was famous that he studied philosophy, he studied medicine, right? He studied at length. And so the Alter Rebbe makes the clear exception that the exception to the rule, right? And this is why, despite the fact that college campuses are a very dangerous environment. Despite that fact, a Jew is allowed to go to college because when it comes to a livelihood, or what the Torah refers to as kardom lachtochba, in other words, to make it a spade to dig with, because back in the day that's what you used to provide a livelihood for your family, then you're allowed to. In other words, if the intention of learning this secular wisdom, whatever this secular wisdom may be, is in order to provide a livelihood for your family, especially in order to use that livelihood to then, right, like we said, livelihood can go either way, right? You're going to use that livelihood, that energy that comes from that livelihood, to actually uplift the livelihood and use it for Torah, right? Use it to have a comfortable life like that you can serve God, right? Use it to retire like that you can actually study Torah a whole day. Use it to support your family like that you can bring children into the world. All these different mitzvahs and etc., right? So then you are allowed to study secular wisdom, as the author mentions all the way at the end of the chapter. That is the exception to the rule, and that is why the Rambam and the Ramban, Maimonides and Nachmanides, were famous for having done that, all for their livelihood. And with this we conclude Jewish Mysticism Lessons in Tanya, Chapter 8, Negative Energy, Part 2. And with this we also conclude the entire series titled The Basics. And we will see you all on March 7th, right back here at Yaakov's library at Chabad of Pasadena, Pasadena Jewish Academy, for series number 2, titled, what's it titled? Your Inner Struggle. And that will begin with Chapter 9, The War Inside You.